welcome to Crimes Through Time, snapshots of crime history. Born on the 15th of May 1847, Samuel Herbert Dougal was the eldest son of Maria Josephine Thompson and Samuel Dredge Dougal in Bow, London. After his schooling, he took up an apprenticeship with a firm of civil engineers, but by March 1866, aged 19, he had racked up considerable debt. Drowning, he enlisted to the Royal Engineers at Clapham to escape. For the first 12 years, he was assigned to survey work with the Ordnance Survey. He would marry for the first time to Lavinia Martha Griffiths in 1869, aged 23. Martha already had 4 children. Their first child together, Charles Herbert Dougal, was born in London in 1871. They would have more children together, but tragically none would survive infancy. In 1877, Samuel was promoted to chief clerk and chose to be transferred to Halifax, Nova Scotia. Martha and Samuel's marriage would last for 16 years. He was a cruel and unfaithful husband. He would regularly be violent with her and the children. He had a constant string of mistresses, which resulted in many illegitimate children. Their relationship would end in June 1885, when Martha fell ill with vomiting and stomach cramps, which within 12 hours would claim her life. She had no history of prior illness or health conditions. Distraught, Samuel took leave and travelled home to England. He returned to Canada 2 months later, married to an Irish lady, much younger than himself, Mary Herbert Boyd. It was a short-lived marriage, because in October 1885, Mary succumbed to a sudden illness of vomiting and stomach cramps. She was hurriedly buried next to Martha at Fort Massey. Next up was Betty Stedman. She initially returned to England with Samuel when he was discharged from the army in March 1887, but she suffered the same ill treatment Martha endured and escaped back to Canada. He would move in with his brother before setting up home on the Isle of Wight with Marion Payne, a recent widow with children. They would never marry, but would have several children together. In 1889, they acquired the goodwill and furniture of the Royston Crow public house on Baldock Street, Ware, Hertfordshire. The venture struggled. A fire would break out on the premises, but thankfully was extinguished by a business neighbour. But strangely, within days, another fire started. Arson was suspected and Samuel was charged with defrauding an insurance company, but was found not guilty. However, the magistrates refused to return his publican licence. By 1892, Marion had had enough of Samuel's abuse and she left him, and he moved on to Dublin. He wasn't alone for long. Later that year, he married 20-year-old Irish lady Sarah Henrietta White. Together they would start to defraud easily victimised women. He would persuade Emily Booty to let him live in her house, posing as husband and wife. He promptly moved Sarah in and they would spend all of Emily's money. Emily would have to go through much public humiliation to regain possession of her property, but they were eventually moved along. In 1895, Samuel was working in the office of the commander of the forces in Dublin. He was found guilty of stealing and forging cheques, and he was sentenced to 12 months in prison with hard labour to be served at Pentonville prison. But Samuel, always on the grift, faked a suicide attempt 2 months in, and he was removed from prison to Cane Hill Lunatic Asylum for the remaining 10 months. He was discharged as, quote, perfectly sane on the 8th of December 1896. But he wasn't without some consequences. He'd lost his army pension, and now, aged 50, it was getting harder to find work. Henry, Samuel's youngest brother, offered him work in Biggin Hill, Kent. Sarah joined him from Dublin. But it wasn't long before Samuel's violent behaviour got too much for both his wife and his brother, and he was soon alone and out of the job. Samuel headed to London. In 1898, Camille Holland was living in Elgin Crescent, London. She was an independent woman with a personal wealth of £7,000. However, aged 55 and still single, she decided to advertise for a husband. Samuel, despite still being legally married, presented himself as a candidate. Soon after meeting in the autumn, the couple moved to Brighton, setting up home and introducing themselves as Mr. and Mrs. Dougal, although there was no evidence any marriage service ever took place. They entered into negotiations to purchase Coldham's, a farm in Clavering, Essex. Samuel chose the property, but it was Camille who paid, and she wasn't as naive as Samuel had hoped. Despite his protestations, she insisted the contract and the deeds be in her name. To the outside world they were married, but Camille conducted all her financial affairs completely separate. They took lodgings with Mrs. Wiskin from the 19th of January 1899 in Market Row in Saffron Walden, while they renovated their new home, renaming it Moat House Farm, when they moved in on the 27th of April 1899. On the 13th of May, they were joined by their new maid, Florence Florrie Havies. Straight away she became the focus of Samuel's attentions, and on the evening of the 14th he made a move on her in the kitchen, and then on the 16th he tried to enter her room. She successfully fought him off, holding the door shut and calling for Camille to come and help her. Camille rushed to her maid and sent Samuel to bed. She slept in Florrie's room with her for the rest of the night and for the next 2 nights. On the 19th, Florrie was horrified to find out she was alone in the farmhouse with Samuel. He and Camille had left around 6:30 p.m. for a pony and trap ride. Samuel returned around 8:30 p.m. alone, and when she inquired where Camille was, he told her she'd gone to London and she would be back that night. For the rest of the evening, Samuel was in and out of the house, apparently going to meet every train from London until midnight. Finally, at 12:45 a.m, he dismissed Florrie. He did not disturb her that evening, but just in case she slept next to an open window. When she rose at 7 a.m. to begin her chores, she was surprised to find Samuel was up, dressed and eating breakfast. He told Florrie he had received a letter from Camille saying she'd gone on holiday. Now this might have seemed suspicious to Florrie had she not already made arrangements for her mother to come and collect her that morning. She gave her notice, asked for her wages, and left. She was replaced by Emma Burgess. Soon Sarah, Samuel's legal wife, joined him at the farm. They told people she was his widowed daughter, but it was clear that she was his wife. She would wear Camille's clothes and told everyone she was away yachting. Over the next 4 years, Samuel fitted right in with village life, attending church regularly and giving generously to local causes like enlarging the churchyard and the interior redecoration of the church. He also had many liaisons with the local village women. At one point it was reported he was involved with 3 sisters and their mother. A series of young women employed at the farm would fall foul of Samuel's predatory ways, with many of them leaving pregnant. Within 3 months of her employment, Georgina Kate Cramwell, aged 18, was pregnant by Samuel, and she gave birth in December 1902. Samuel, as with all his children, refused to take any financial responsibility, so she applied to the court for an affiliation order, a paternity suit, on the 27th of January 1903. This would be the start of everything unravelling for Samuel. Sarah had already divorced him in August 1902, having left him for the final time that January when she spotted him giving cycling lessons to naked young women behind the farmhouse. The filiation court hearings highlighted the fact that the woman he was living with, Camille, wasn't his legal wife. This led to him being investigated for fraud and forgery, and questions began to be asked about Camille's whereabouts. None of her relatives had heard from her in 4 years. In March 1903, he was charged with forging and steering a cheque, value of £25 15 payable to J. Heath, dated the 28th of August 1902, which had Camille's supposed signature on it. At the trial, the prosecution produced evidence that Samuel had systematically moved money from Camille's accounts into his own, sold her stocks and shares, and even transferred the title of Moat House Farm into his name. The police had all they needed to search the farm. On the 19th of March 1903, the police, quote, took possession of the farm they actually moved in. Essex County Chronicle described it as, quote, "The police officers engaged in the searching of the farm occupied the farmhouse, preparing their meals and making their beds for themselves. Detective Sergeant Scott acts as chef. For 5 weeks they dug around the farm and drained the moat but found nothing suspicious. It was a tip from a local that led to the grave. Samuel, soon after moving into the farm, had had a drainage ditch filled in. They began to search there. On the 27th of April 1903, Camille's body was found. She was laid out in the conservatory at Moat House Farm. Mrs. Whiskin, her former landlady, Ernest Legrand Holland, her nephew, identified Camille. Due to the condition of the body, this was done mainly from her clothes and jewellery. In particular, Camille was wearing shoes made by Mr. Mould, whose name was on the ones found on the body. He was able to confirm he had made that exact pair for Camille. A few days later, Professor Pepper, a Home Office expert, and Dr. Storrs and Sprague, divisional police surgeons, examined Camille. She had been shot in the head at close range. The bullet, quote, must have caused immediate insensibility, which would have continued until death. The bullet was recovered and matched Samuel's revolver. He was committed to trial for murder on the 22nd of June 1903 in Shire Hall, Chelmsford. Mr. Gill, KC, for the Crown, laid out their theory of the crime in the opening statement. On the evening of the 19th of May 1899, Samuel took Camille out on a pony and trap ride around the farm. Once they arrived at the pre-prepared grave, he shot her in the back of the head and then buried her body in the drainage ditch. At 3:55 p.m. on the 23rd of June 1903, the jury retired to deliberate. In 55 minutes, they returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Mr. Justice Wright sentenced him to death for the murder of Camille Holland 4 years previous. Although I'm sure you agree that the deaths of his first wives, Martha and Mary, were very suspicious and, in my opinion, murder. He was executed by William Billingham at Chelmsford Prison at 8 a.m. on the 14th of July 1903. There was a little controversy with allegations that an overzealous chaplain had badgered a confession of guilt on the scaffold. He was buried in the ground of Chelmsford Prison with only his initials and a number on the wall nearby to mark his grave. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and let me know what you think of this case in the comments below, and I look forward to welcoming you in the next one.